Chosen one, you clocked the envious setup instantly, the kind of plot people run when they can't stand your rise. You didn't interrupt the mistake, you handed them the pen. Now they're stunned, replaying moments, realizing too late you were always ahead. You mastered envy completely. When chaos erupted around you, something inside clicked into a mode they've never accessed. Ice cold, laser focused, completely in control. They expected panic, they got precision instead. See, most people react when they feel attacked. Their ego demands immediate response. Their emotions hijack their logic, but you slowed down time in your mind like a general surveying a battlefield. You paused, you observed, you stayed silent, and that silence wasn't weakness, that was warfare. You watched how their smile twitched just a fraction too late, how their laugh sounded forced when others were around, how they'd hype you up in public but question you in private. Every single tell, you catalogued it. You became fluent in the language of fake. Here's what they didn't know. You were already several versions ahead of them. While they were plotting move number 1, you'd already mapped out the next several moves and prepared contingencies for each. This is where you started understanding the depth of what was happening. This wasn't just simple jealousy. This was calculated. They'd been studying you, watching your patterns, taking notes on your vulnerabilities. They thought they were building a trap. What they didn't realize is that you were letting them build it. Because here's the secret about traps. When someone's so focused on setting one for you, they never notice when they're standing in the middle of their own. You didn't confront them because you knew something powerful. Emotional reactions give away your hand. They reveal what matters to you, what hurts you, what shakes you, and you weren't about to hand them that information on a silver platter. So instead you did something that would haunt them later. You acted completely unbothered, not fake unbothered, genuinely focused on your own elevation while they wasted energy trying to drag you down. While you were staying calm externally, internally, you were doing something brilliant. You were turning their chaos into data. Every jab they threw, every weird vibe, every shady move. It wasn't random to you. It was information, and you collected it like a detective building a case, not for some dramatic confrontation, but for something far more devastating: your strategic and complete disappearance from their life at exactly the right moment. They really believed they were being slick with those quiet conversations in corners, that sneaky shade disguised as concern, the group chats you weren't in, where your name kept coming up. They thought their whispers were quiet, but sound travels in ways they never studied, and you were born with ears that hear frequencies they don't even know exist. You let them talk, you let them scheme, you let them build their little alliance against you, because here's what you understood that they didn't. People who conspire together eventually turn on each other. It's just a matter of time. So while they were busy bonding over their shared obsession with you, you were watching the cracks form in their foundation. You saw how one person would say something slightly different to each individual, how the story changed depending on the audience, how their unity was built on sand. And you didn't just hear their words, you read their energy, how their tone shifted when others were around, how their support came with backhanded compliments, how they'd celebrate you when it made them look good but undermine you when they thought no one was watching. You caught it all, every inconsistency, and you filed it away in a mental database they didn't know existed. You didn't expose them, not yet, because you knew something about human nature that they'd forgotten. When you confront liars too early, they just get better at lying. They tighten up their story. They warn their co-conspirators. They prepare defenses. But when you let them think they're getting away with it, they get comfortable, sloppy, arrogant. They start believing their own lies. And that's when they make the mistakes that expose themselves. So you let the echo get louder. You let them dig deeper. You let them commit harder to their narrative about you. All while you were building something they couldn't see. Not a defense, an exit strategy. because you weren't planning to fight them in the mud. You were planning to disappear into a dimension they couldn't access and watch them scramble to explain your absence. When they came at you with negativity, you didn't swing back. You didn't match their energy. You did something that confused them completely. You absorbed it. Like a black hole bends light. You took all their hatred, all their envy, all their attempts to shake you, and you redirected it into fuel for your own elevation. They wanted a reaction. They needed you off balance, angry, defensive. That was their entire goal. If they could make you look emotional, unstable, reactive, they could paint themselves as the reasonable ones. But you saw that game before they set the board, so you gave them nothing, not because you didn't feel it, but because you refused to give them the satisfaction of knowing they'd affected you. While they were obsessing over you, spending hours discussing you, analyzing your every move, you were leveling up in complete silence. You were working on yourself, your skills, your mindset, your positioning. Every minute they spent hating on you was a minute you spent building something they couldn't touch. That's the advantage of being the target. While they're focused on you, you can see them clearly, but they're so obsessed with tearing you down, they can't see you're actually going up. And something shifted in you during this phase. You stopped seeing their attacks as problems and started seeing them as fuel. Every insult became motivation. Every obstacle became a challenge to overcome. Every closed door became inspiration to build your own entrance. You literally alchemized their negativity into gold. You turned their poison into medicine, and they had no idea they were funding their own irrelevance. They mistook your silence for cluelessness. Because you weren't defending yourself publicly, they thought you didn't know what was happening. Because you weren't confronting them directly, they assumed you were oblivious to their plot. That was their fatal mistake. Your silence wasn't ignorance. It was strategy. It was power. It was you building an arsenal while they thought you were building alibis. See, there's a massive difference between being quiet and being dormant. You weren't sitting still because you didn't know what to do. You were sitting still because you knew exactly what to do, and you were waiting for the perfect moment to do it. While they were plotting in the shallow end, you were diving deep, upgrading your mindset, sharpening your skills, fortifying your position. You weren't defending yourself with words because you were letting your actions speak. You weren't explaining yourself to people already committed to misunderstanding you. You were working in silence, building in private, evolving behind closed doors where their eyes couldn't reach and their opinions couldn't infect. Every day they thought you were lost was actually a day you were getting found, finding your power, finding your purpose, finding the version of yourself that would make their whole plot irrelevant. While they were studying your past moves, you were inventing future ones they couldn't anticipate. You weren't following a pattern they could track. You were creating new patterns entirely. You were operating in dimensions they didn't know existed. That's the advantage of silence. It makes you unpredictable, unreadable, impossible to pin down. If this message hits your spirit, hype this video so more chosen ones like you can find it. You didn't need to expose them because they were exposing themselves. See, people who operate in darkness eventually need light to see what they're doing. And the moment they step into the light to congratulate themselves on their schemes, everyone else can see them too. You just had to wait for them to get comfortable enough to celebrate publicly. And they did. They got so confident in their plot that they started getting sloppy, dropping hints in public spaces, making jokes that revealed too much, treating you differently in front of people who started to notice. And those people, the ones who truly knew you, started asking questions, not to you, to themselves, about why someone who claimed to care about you was acting so strange. You watched it happen in real time, the confused looks from mutual connections, the awkward silences when they'd try to bash you in front of someone who actually knew your character, the slowly dawning realization on faces of people who were starting to see what you'd seen all along. You didn't say a word. You didn't need to. Their behavior was writing a story that anyone with eyes could read. And this is where your restraint paid dividends, because you could have warned people, you could have gone around telling everyone who would listen, but you didn't. You let people come to their own conclusions, and those conclusions hit different when they're self-discovered. When people figure out the truth on their own, they trust it more, they believe it deeper, they remember it longer. You stopped building in spaces where they had access. You stopped sharing your dreams with people who didn't have the vision to see them. You stopped explaining your moves to individuals who didn't have the depth to understand them. You went underground with your ambitions, not because you were hiding, because you were protecting. You realized that some seeds need to be planted in darkness to grow, that some visions need to be nurtured in private before they're ready for public consumption. So you started moving differently. You stopped posting every move. You stopped announcing every plan. You stopped seeking validation for every decision. And in that privacy, something magical happened. You grew faster. Without the pressure of outside opinions, you could experiment. You could fail without an audience. You could pivot without explanation. You could become without commentary. The absence of their energy in your creative process allowed you to tap into something pure, something authentic, something that was truly yours. You started building relationships they didn't know about, developing skills they couldn't track, creating opportunities in spaces they didn't have access to. And this wasn't about being secretive. This was about being wise, about understanding that not everyone deserves a front-row seat to your process. This is where you became truly free, free from their opinions, free from their limitations, free from their need to know everything about what you were doing. You stopped operating like your life was a public performance and started treating it like the private journey it was always meant to be. And in that privacy, you discovered parts of yourself that had been dormant, parts that needed space away from their judgment to emerge. You started connecting dots they couldn't see, building bridges they didn't know existed, creating pathways that only made sense to you. And the beautiful part was that you stopped needing it to make sense to anyone else. You stopped requiring their understanding. You stopped seeking their approval. You just built and built and built, in frequencies so high they couldn't hear the music you were creating. There came a moment when the dynamic changed. You couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but you felt it. The shift, the pivot, the turning of tides. Suddenly, you weren't on the defensive anymore. You weren't reacting to their moves. You weren't concerned with their opinions. You had moved into a space where their actions simply didn't affect your trajectory anymore. And they felt it too. You could see it in how they started reaching out more. And they felt it too. You could see it in how they started reaching out more. How their energy shifted from confident to concerned, how they started asking questions disguised as casual check-ins. They could sense something was different, but couldn't identify what. You were still kind, still civil, still polite when paths crossed. But there was a quality to your presence they couldn't name, a certainty, a groundedness, because you did know something they didn't. You knew that everything they tried had failed. Not because you fought it, but because you'd outgrown the version of yourself they were trying to attack. They were still aiming arrows at who you used to be, not realizing you weren't standing in that spot anymore. You'd evolved past their target range. This is when their panic started setting in. Not obvious panic, but the subtle kind that shows up in overcompensation. They started trying too hard to seem unbothered, started posting more about how great their life was, but you could see through it. It was the behavior of someone who suddenly realized they might have miscalculated, and you didn't gloat, you didn't rub it in, you just kept moving, kept building, kept growing, because revenge wasn't the goal, evolution was, and you were evolving at a rate that made their attacks obsolete before they even landed. This was the revelation that changed everything. You looked around one day and realized that not only had you survived their plot, you were actually doing better than you ever had. Their attacks hadn't destroyed you, they'd refined you. Their betrayal hadn't broken you. It had redirected you toward better paths. Their absence from your life hadn't left you empty. It had created space for people who actually deserved to be there. Every door they tried to close had forced you to build your own entrance. And in building your own entrance, you'd created something better than what you would have walked through if they'd left it open. Every relationship they poisoned had taught you exactly what you wouldn't tolerate anymore. Every lie they spread had clarified what your truth actually was. You started seeing their plot not as an attack, but as an accelerator. It had forced you to level up faster than you would have on your own. It had pushed you to develop resilience you didn't know you needed. In trying to destroy you, they'd actually helped you destroy every version of yourself that wasn't strong enough to handle what was coming next. And what was coming next was bigger than anything you'd imagined before their betrayal, because you weren't playing small anymore. You weren't dimming yourself to make others comfortable. You weren't shrinking to fit in spaces that were too small for your destiny. You were expanding, growing, becoming. This is when gratitude started mixing with your awareness. Not gratitude for them as people, but gratitude for the lesson, for the clarity, for the pruning that needed to happen in your life, but you were too attached to do yourself. They did you a favor by showing their true colors. You stopped seeing yourself as their target and started seeing yourself as the victor of your own story. A story where their betrayal was just one chapter, not even the main one, just a middle section where the protagonist faces adversity and emerges stronger. You were the main character, always had been, and main characters don't let supporting actors determine the ending of their journey. You realized that their betrayal wasn't personal, it was positional. They didn't attack you because of who you were. They attacked you because of where you were going, because your trajectory threatened their comfort zone, because your growth exposed their stagnation, because your light made their shadows visible. And once you understood that, you stopped taking it personally and started taking it as confirmation that you were on the right path. You realized that the game was never fair, but it wasn't rigged against you like they thought. It was rigged in your favor, because while they were playing with tricks, you were playing with truth. While they were building on lies, you were building on foundation. While they were creating illusions, you were creating reality, and reality always wins in the long run. Illusions fade, lies unravel, masks slip, but truth remains. It doesn't need defense, it doesn't need explanation, it just exists, and you'd built your entire life on it. So while their house of cards was always destined to collapse, your structure was built to last. You understood something they didn't, that shortcuts always have a longer route on the back end, that easy wins create hard losses later, that cheating the process means the result will never be sustainable. They wanted quick victory, you wanted lasting success. They wanted to look good now, you wanted to be good always. They wanted the appearance of winning, you wanted the reality of growth. And that difference in approach meant that even when they seemed to be ahead, you knew it was temporary. Their lead was built on sand, yours was built on stone. Time and truth were always going to be on your side. You just had to be patient enough to let them do their work. Starseeds, they never expected this. The technology used to suppress consciousness has been reverse-engineered, and Destiny Engine is the result. What was once used against humanity is now your ascension weapon. You can now MK Ultra yourself into 5D superpowers. Destiny Engine bypasses the conscious mind and rewrites the source code directly. Reality bends faster. Synchronicities stack. Your nervous system upgrades to a higher bandwidth. Put on headphones. Press play. That's all. For $1, you switch sides of history. Click the link in the description. The takeover is internal. Now we arrive at the moment where everything changed. The trap was set so elegantly that they volunteered to walk into it singing your name. You gave them the illusion of victory. You let them think they were ahead. You allowed them to believe their plot was working, and that was the most brilliant move of all. See, people drunk on the illusion of power make the sloppiest mistakes. They get overconfident, they drop their guard, they stop being careful because they think they've already won. So you fed them that illusion like premium bait. You played a role, not the victim, never that, but the person who seemed just oblivious enough to make them comfortable, just unbothered enough to make them think their attacks weren't landing, and while they were celebrating their perceived victory, you were behind the scenes rewriting the entire script. Not with ego, with precision. They thought they had the main role in this story. They didn't realize the plot was never about them. It was always about you, your growth, your transformation, your ascension. You didn't fight their ego. You used it. You let them feel superior. Let them think they'd outsmarted you. Let them get comfortable in their arrogance, because you knew something about human nature. Comfortable enemies make easy targets. And then something beautiful happened. You started to see the pieces falling into place. The people who really mattered started to see through their performance. The opportunities you'd been building in silence started to materialize. The version of yourself you'd been constructing in private started to emerge in public. And suddenly, without any dramatic announcement, without any big confrontation, the power dynamic shifted completely. They felt it before they saw it. That change in the air, that moment when they realized you weren't where they thought you were anymore. You weren't behind them. You weren't beside them. You were so far ahead they couldn't even see you in their rear-view mirror, and the trap they'd been setting for you, they were standing in the middle of it. The plot they thought would destroy you, it was destroying them. The narrative they tried to write about you, it was exposing them instead. You saw this coming because you operate in a bandwidth they can't tune into. While they were looking at surface-level wins and losses, you were reading undercurrents they didn't know existed. They thought they could hide jealousy under smiles, but your intuition doesn't need proof, it just knows. And it knew this plot was unfolding long before they finalized their first move. You weren't being paranoid, you were being perceptive. You picked up on signals they didn't realize they were broadcasting, the micro-expressions they couldn't control, the energy shifts they couldn't hide, the patterns they couldn't break. You saw it all with a clarity that made you dangerous, and this is where your higher vision created the ultimate advantage. While they were executing their plot on the ground level, you were watching from heights they couldn't reach. You could see the whole map, all the players, all the moves, all the outcomes. You knew exactly where their path would lead them before they took the first step. So you didn't waste energy trying to stop them. You just cleared yourself from their trajectory and watched them crash into the wall they built themselves. They were speaking volume. You were speaking vision. They were calculating tactics. You were engineering destiny. And when they tried to play you, they couldn't even read the rules because the game wasn't designed for their level. You weren't playing in their dimension. You'd transcended to a plane where their moves didn't just fail, they didn't even register. This is the moment when everything they tried became fuel for everything you accomplished. Their whispers became the background music to your rise. Their plots became the ladder you climbed. Their betrayal became the catalyst for your transformation. You didn't just survive what they did. You used it as raw material to build something they could never reach, never touch, never even fully understand. You didn't return their energy. You absorbed it and evolved past them entirely. They expected you to break under the pressure, to lash out, to get bitter like them. They thought their sabotage would derail you, but you did the opposite of everything they hoped for. You grew, you transformed, you transcended. You didn't mirror their chaos, you metabolized it. Every insult became a building block. Every obstacle became a stepping stone. Every betrayal became the push you needed to level up in ways you wouldn't have without the pressure they applied. While they were trying to distract you, you were using their distraction as cover to work harder than you ever had before. Not out of spite, out of purpose. You knew something they didn't. Responding to everyone who challenges you is a waste of energy. Defending yourself to people already committed to misunderstanding you is pointless. So you stopped. You stopped explaining. You stopped defending. You stopped proving. And you started building. You redirected all the energy you could have wasted on conflict into creating something they couldn't touch. Your success wasn't just a flex. It was the consequence. The response they never saw coming because they were too focused on the moment while you were engineering the aftermath. You didn't clap back with words. You clapped back with results. You didn't fight them in the mud. You elevated so far above them they couldn't even explain what happened. They wanted you to fall. You ascended. They wanted you to fail. You flourished. They wanted you to fade. 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 You became unforgettable, not to prove them wrong, but because that's what happens when you choose growth over games, when you choose evolution over revenge, when you choose to become the storm instead of hiding from the rain. And the storm wasn't destruction, it was your arrival, calm, collected, completely in control. They never saw it coming because they were too busy underestimating your silence, misreading your calm, ignoring the fact that you'd been preparing for this moment since the day you first felt the shift. You didn't just beat them, you made them beat themselves. You created conditions where their own actions led to their own downfall, where their own choices revealed their own character, where their own words exposed their own intentions. You didn't have to do anything except step back and let karma do what it does best. And karma showed up at their door, wearing their own bad intentions like a name tag. You didn't need to expose them publicly. Their behavior exposed them. You didn't need to defend yourself. Your results defended you. You didn't need to prove you were better. You just became so undeniably successful that the contrast between where you ended up and where they stayed spoke louder than any words ever could. And this is where the circular narrative completes itself. You started this story by not interrupting your enemy while they made mistakes. You passed them the pen and let them sign their downfall. And now at the end they're holding that signed document, wondering how they got here, how you went from their target to completely unreachable, how you transformed from someone they tried to diminish into someone they can't even touch. The answer is simple. You saw the plot before they finished writing it. You studied their intentions while they copied your moves. You built an empire while they built resentment. You mastered discipline while they drowned in envy. You operated on a frequency they couldn't access. You turned their attacks into your ammunition. You made their plot irrelevant by becoming too elevated for it to reach you. You were never the victim of their story. You were always the author of your own. They thought they were writing your ending. Really, you were editing theirs. Every move you made, every silence you held, every reaction you refused to give, it was all part of a master plan they never saw because they were too busy watching what you did to notice what you were becoming. This entire journey taught you something invaluable. Being chosen doesn't mean everyone will choose you. It means you have the strength to walk away from those who don't, the wisdom to recognize when to engage and when to observe, the discipline to control your reactions when everything in you wants to explode, the vision to see beyond present circumstances into future possibilities you're actively creating. You are the chosen one they tried to break but couldn't bend, the one they plotted against but couldn't predict, the one they envied but couldn't diminish, the one they betrayed but couldn't defeat. And now you stand on the other side of their scheme, stronger than before, wiser than ever, and completely unbothered by the noise they tried to create around you. You saw the plot from far away. You didn't just see it, you used it. You turned their attack into your ascension. You made their betrayal your breakthrough. You converted their poison into your power. And you did it all with such precision, such grace, such complete mastery, that they're still trying to figure out what happened. This is your story, chosen one, not theirs, and no matter how hard they tried to write you out of it, you remained the author, the protagonist, and the victor. You played the game they didn't know existed, and you won before they realized it started. Welcome home. You passed them the pen, they signed their downfall, and you served them their own game so perfectly that even you have to admire the artistry of it all. This isn't where your story ends. This is where your legend begins. You now know exactly what you're capable of. You know that you can take the worst betrayal and turn it into your greatest testimony. You know that you can absorb the heaviest attacks and transform them into the strongest armor. You know that you don't just survive plots against you, you use them as launching pads to heights your enemies can't even conceive. The next time someone tries to plot against you, and they will because greatness always attracts envy, you'll know exactly what to do. You'll recognize the signs before the first move gets made. You'll see the shift in energy before the mask even thinks about slipping. You'll feel the change in frequency before the whispers start echoing, and you'll respond with the same calculated precision that got you here. You'll pass them the pen. You'll let them think they're winning. You'll stay silent while building your next empire. You'll redirect their energy into fuel for your next level. You'll document every inconsistency. You'll watch them expose themselves. You'll build in frequencies they can't access. And when the time is right, you'll serve them their own game so perfectly they'll wonder if you're even human. Because Chosen One, this is who you are. This is what you do. This is your design. You don't just see plots from a mile away. You turn them into masterclasses on domination. You don't just survive betrayal. You transform it into your origin story. You don't just overcome obstacles. You convert them into opportunities that propel you into dimensions others can't reach. You've learned the ultimate lesson. That being chosen isn't about being protected from adversity. It's about having the power to transform adversity into advantage. It's about seeing attacks as assignments, betrayals as blessings in disguise, enemies as unwitting allies in your evolution. You've mastered the art of turning everything that comes against you into everything that works for you. And that's why your legend is just beginning. Because you're not just a survivor, you're an alchemist. You don't just endure storms, you become them. You don't just play the game, you rewrite the rules while everyone else is still trying to understand the board. This is your power, this is your gift, this is your destiny, and now that you've activated it, there's no limit to what you can accomplish. So stand tall, Chosen One. You earned this moment. You survived the plot. You served the game. You became the storm. And now you step into the next chapter of your journey carrying the wisdom that no weapon formed against you can prosper. Not because weapons won't be formed, but because you've mastered the art of turning those weapons into tools for your own construction. Welcome to your reign.